Good afternoon. Our first item of business today is a statement from the First Minister on COVID-19 next steps. The First Minister will take questions following her statement. I would encourage all members who wish to ask a question to press their request to speak buttons as soon as they wish. And I call on the First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon.
Presiding Officer, thanks for the opportunity to report on the latest review of the coronavirus lockdown regulations. Firstly, I'll summarise the progress we have made so far in tackling the virus. I'll then set out the careful changes we intend to make to the rules and guidance over the next 3 weeks and when the various changes will take effect. And finally, I'll give details of some further work we have commissioned to inform future decision-making. Let me start, though, with my usual report on the daily statistics. In doing so, I thank our health and care workers, indeed all key workers, for the extraordinary work they are doing in these incredibly testing circumstances. As at 9 o'clock this morning, there have been 18,077 positive cases confirmed, an increase of 11 from yesterday. A total of 929 patients are in hospital with COVID-19. That represents a total decrease of 36 from yesterday, including a decrease of 6 in the number of confirmed cases. A total of 23 people last night were in intensive care with confirmed or suspected COVID-19, and that's a decrease of 1 since yesterday. Unfortunately, I also have to report that in the past 24 hours, 2 deaths have been registered of patients who had been confirmed through a test as having COVID-19. That takes the total number of deaths in Scotland under that measurement to 2,464. Those numbers, together with the figures that were published yesterday by National Records of Scotland, make very clear the human cost of this virus. That human cost has been utterly devastating, and it should serve as a serious warning against any complacency as we move into this next phase of fighting what is a dangerous and, sadly, often deadly virus. However, the sustained decline in the number of people dying from the virus also demonstrates the real progress we have made. Yesterday's NRS data showed that the number of COVID deaths last week was less than 1/9 of the peak level. The number of people in intensive care has now fallen by more than 90% since the peak, and hospital admissions, which at one stage were 200 every day, are now down to single figures each day. The R number is currently below 1, and it has now been stable at between 0.6 and 0.9 for the past 3 weeks. And we estimate that the number of people who could be infectious with coronavirus in Scotland as of last Friday was 2,900. Now, let me remind the Chamber and the public that 3 weeks ago, our estimate, which has since been revised, was 19,000. So the progress we have made to date is clear and it is substantial. But, Presiding Officer, it has only been possible because of the efforts and enormous sacrifices that people right across Scotland have made, and I am deeply grateful to each and every one for all of that. Taking account of that progress and of the other evidence that we are required to assess, I am therefore very pleased today to confirm that the Scottish Government has concluded that we can now move into the next phase of our exit from lockdown. And I will set out specifically what that means in a moment. However, I want to stress that we must still exercise care and caution. Our progress so far is because of lockdown. The virus has not gone away, and we must all remember that. So as we gradually remove the restrictions that have kept it under control, there is a very real risk that transmission could rise again. That is why, if we don't want to go backwards, as none of us do, we must progress forwards very carefully. And I know that in many ways that actually requires even more patience now than it did previously, when perhaps the danger of the virus was more obvious. As we start to feel that the virus is receding, there will be a growing and an understandable desire to move back to normality more quickly. And we will all feel frustrated at times if that journey seems too slow. That is true for individuals, for all of us, and also, I know, for business. The impact of this crisis on businesses, large and small, is colossal. and we all want the economy to reopen as quickly as possible. But if, as I believe is the case, frustration leading to a premature easing of too many restrictions is our biggest risk right now, it is equally true to say that patience could reap our biggest rewards. If we can suppress this virus more, get as close as possible to eliminating it now, then we give ourselves a better chance, not just of controlling future outbreaks or clusters, but of doing so through more targeted measures, rather than general blanket restrictions on our way of life. The alternative, which would happen if we moved too quickly, is the virus continuing to circulate in the community at a higher level of transmission. And the measures that are then needed to stop it running out of control and growing exponentially again are more restrictive, and they have to be applied much more generally and potentially for much longer. So difficult though I know all of this is, the prize for going a bit more carefully now is a recovery that is much more sustainable, and one that will, I hope, allow more normality to be restored to our everyday lives. Now, that will be important in every aspect of life, but it will be particularly vital for children getting back to normal full-time schooling as quickly as possible. So this is why, though we are moving to phase 2 today, we are still being cautious, and we are not going to do everything at once. We intend to take a staged approach to avoid bearing all of the risk at the same time. In deciding when to implement each measure, we have tried to reach a reasonable order of priority, and also to think about the various interdependencies, about how a decision that we take in one area affects life in other areas. All of that said, I readily acknowledge how difficult this is. There is no perfect route out of lockdown. All approaches, and any approach we take, will have risks. What we are trying to do is manage and mitigate those risks as far as we possibly can. Because of this, we have decided that during phase 2, we will continue to ask people as far as possible to stay within or close to their local area. Our ambition is to be in a position to lift this restriction in phase 3 and in good time for the proposed resumption of tourism from the 15th of July. But at this stage, for leisure and recreation purposes, we are asking people not to travel more than around 5 miles or so from their home, though let me stress that does not apply to meeting family and friends. And of course, home working should still be the norm wherever that is possible. Asking people to abide by this guidance gives us much greater confidence in making other changes during phase 2. So I want to take some time now to set out the most important of these changes in the order in which we propose that they happen. Detail of all of the changes that will be made during phase 2 and the timing of them will be available on the Scottish Government website. Now, the only change which will take effect immediately from today is in our guidance for people who are shielding, those who are most at risk from COVID-19 and who have been therefore advised up until now to stay inside completely. I indicated last week my hope that from today, anyone who is shielding, unless you live in a nursing home or a residential care home, would be able to go outdoors for exercise, for example, for a walk, wheel or cycle. And I am very pleased to confirm this change today. So if you have been shielding and you plan to take some outdoors exercise today, you can go ahead. Although, of course, you're also very welcome to continue to listen to my remarks first. However, our clinical advisors have made a further assessment of the evidence, and I'm pleased to say they have given the go-ahead to some additional changes to the guidance. Now, to provide some advance notice of this, we've decided that these additional changes will apply from tomorrow. So from tomorrow, our advice will be that shielding people can also take part in non-contact outdoor activities such as golf, for example. In addition, the advice from tomorrow will be that people who are shielding can meet outdoors with people from one other household, but in groups of no more than 8. However, if you are shielding, you should continue to be extremely cautious, and I want to stress this point. That means staying at least 2 metres away from other people at all times, even if you live with the people that you're outside with. Do not go inside someone else's house or allow someone from another household to go inside yours, even to use a toilet. And when you do go outside, try to choose times and areas that are more quiet. And please wash your hands thoroughly as soon as you get back home. I know that the requirement to stay indoors at all times without meeting up with anyone has been incredibly tough for shielding people, probably the toughest aspect, undoubtedly the toughest aspect of this lockdown. So I hope that this change to our advice, by allowing not just outdoor exercise but limited outdoor meetings, can provide a real improvement to your quality of life without, crucially, significantly increasing the risks that you face. And we will, of course, provide further guidance before the 31st of July, when the current shielding period is due to end. Let me turn now to advice for the general population. We are also making some limited changes which will take effect from tomorrow to the rules on social interaction for those who are not being asked to shield. These rules currently state that one household can meet up with just one other household. These meetings must be outdoors and should involve no more than 8 people, maintaining strict physical distancing of 2 metres. From tomorrow, people from one household can meet outdoors with people from up to 2 other households. You can meet these 2 households together or separately, and it doesn't always have to be the same households, but it should be no more than 2 at a time and no more than 2 in a single day. And we are still advising no more than 8 in any group. We will also change the guidance so that you can, if necessary, go indoors to use a toilet if you are meeting in the garden of another household. And I hope that these changes will make family meetings a little bit more practical. Please, however, though, remember that meetings must still be outdoors at this stage. With the one exception I will outline shortly, we still judge that the risk of mixed household gatherings indoors is too high at this stage. And if you do go inside to use a toilet, please avoid touching surfaces and immediately and thoroughly clean those you do touch. By doing that, you will avoid creating a possible bridge for the virus to travel from one household to another. Now, finally, when we consider what changes to make, we are always mindful of the wider harms that have come from the restrictions in place to tackle COVID. One of those harms is loneliness and isolation, particularly for older people living alone and for lone parents. So from tomorrow, we will change advice to allow anyone who lives on their own or who lives only with children under 18 to form an extended household group with one other household. Within an extended household group, people will be able to meet indoors without physical distancing and stay overnight, though only, of course, if they wish to do so. But they must continue to see any other households outdoors only and stay more than 2 metres apart from them. No member of such an extended household group should form a similar arrangement with any other household, and an extended household must not include someone who is shielding. Also, if one member of an extended group gets the virus, all of the group will have to isolate, whether or not they are living in the same property. I would also encourage those who choose to form extended households to pay particular attention to hygiene measures to reduce the risk that one household will bring the virus into another. Now, this extended household change is not open-ended, though we will consider if and to what extent we can expand it over the next few weeks. And so I know it will not immediately make a difference for everyone. But it will, from tomorrow, allow a grandparent who lives on their own to form a group with another household in their family. It will allow a single parent and their children to join with another household for support. And it will allow a non-cohabiting couple, where at least one of them lives alone, to be reunited indoors without physical distancing. It will, I hope, help to ease some of the isolation, which is one of the cruelest consequences of tackling this virus. Now, inevitably, Presiding Officer, there are complexities involved in these changes, and there will be many questions about the detail. So you will find more information on the Scottish Government website. However, with the best will in the world, we can't provide precise answers for every single bespoke situation. So when in doubt, please use your judgment and err on the side of caution. And if you worry that something you're thinking of doing risks spreading the virus, please don't do it. The various changes I have just outlined are the only ones that will take effect before this weekend. However, further changes will then come into effect on Monday, the 22nd of June. For example, from then, the construction sector will be able to move to the next phase of its restart plan and then move through the remaining phases subject to ongoing consultation with government. Dentists will be able to reopen from Monday, initially for urgent care. Professional sport can resume, although since strict public health restrictions remain in place, this will only be behind closed doors. And places of worship will reopen, but for individual prayer only, not communal worship. I know that during this crisis, many will have drawn real strength and comfort from their faith. But I also know that people of all faiths are missing the ability to gather together. I want to acknowledge that and also thank the priests, ministers, rabbis, imams and many others who've worked so hard to keep in touch with faith groups. The nature of this virus and how it spreads means that it may still be some time before large religious gatherings are permitted. But I do hope that the reopening of places of worship for individual prayer will be welcomed and that it can and will provide an additional source of comfort for many. These changes are the main ones that will take effect from Monday next week. However, in 11 days' time, from Monday the 29th of June, some further Phase 2 changes will take effect. From then, some indoor workplaces that have so far opted to remain closed in line with guidance, such as factories, labs and warehouses, can start to reopen, but subject to strict physical distancing, hygiene and health and safety guidance. Non-essential offices and call centres should remain closed at this stage. Businesses able to reopen should use the period between now and 29th June to ensure that all physical distancing and safety measures are in place and to contact their staff to put in place staggered work times, agree flexible working where possible for those with childcare issues and ensure that staff have a safe means of getting to work. From 29th of June, outdoor markets will also be able to reopen, as will outdoor playgrounds and outdoor sports centres. Outdoor businesses such as zoos and garden attractions can also reopen from that date. Although initially, until we can hopefully lift this restriction for Phase 3, people should not travel more than around 5 miles to visit them. Where these places are ticketed, tickets should be bought in advance. Restrictions on moving house will also be lifted on the 29th of June. In addition, registration offices will reopen, but only for essential business, and marriages and civil partnerships will be permitted, but only outdoors at this stage and with limited numbers. Let me now turn to non-essential retail. The retail sector is a vital part of our economy. It is also a large and complex sector, and we want to support it to get back to work quickly, but fundamentally safely. We said in the route map that we hope to allow small shops to reopen in Phase 2, and we will. But by waiting a bit longer, until midway through this phase, we can go a bit further, although still with some limitations. So from 29th June, retail premises of all sizes can reopen, but only if they have outdoor entrances and exits. I'm afraid that for the time being, indoor shopping centres will remain closed except for access to essential shops such as supermarkets and pharmacists. However, indoor shopping centres should prepare to reopen in Phase 3 as indicated in the route map. For those shops that can reopen from 29th June, local authorities and retailers should use a period between now and then to ensure that plans for the responsible use of public spaces are in place. For example, to manage queues, pedestrians and cyclists, ensure that unnecessary street furniture is removed and that markings and guidance are in place to support strict physical distancing. Shops must also ensure that appropriate physical distancing and hygiene measures are in place. And of course, all of us as customers have a role to play. When shops do reopen, I ask everyone to exercise patience, stick to the measures that are, after all, in place for our safety, and at all times, please respect retail staff who will be asking you to shop in a slightly different way. Finally, Presiding Officer, there are some changes, especially in relation to health and other public services, which have already begun and which will build up over the coming weeks. There will be a more significant reopening of health services consistent with the NHS mobilisation plan. More GP services will be available and GP practices will make more visits to shielded patients. The health service more generally will resume more of the services which were regrettably postponed in March. As I said earlier, dentists will reopen from this Monday coming. In addition, optometry practices will reopen for emergency and essential services from Monday the 29th of June. We will also work with local authorities and others to resume some care services that were postponed, and more generally, public services will be gradually and safely reopening and scaling up. To take just two examples, energy efficiency schemes and visits to Housing First tenants will start to resume. And public transport will operate increased services during this period, albeit with constraints on capacity due to the need for continued physical distancing. These are the key specific measures which I can confirm at this stage, Presiding Officer. They represent a significant but careful change over the next 3 weeks as we continue to suppress this virus, and they should provide a firm basis for taking further steps in the future. One other change that was envisaged in the route map for Phase 2 was the reopening of outdoor hospitality, such as beer gardens. Unfortunately, I am not able to give a date for that just yet. We may be able to set a date later that is within Phase 2, but I have commissioned further advice from our scientific advisory group to inform this decision. There is emerging evidence that places like pubs, restaurants and gyms can be hotspots for transmission. So it's really important that we better understand this evidence and what further mitigation might be necessary to protect people in such spaces before we permit them to reopen. Now, I appreciate this will be hard for the hospitality industry, and I want to give an assurance to businesses in that sector that we will continue to support preparations for reopening, for example, by encouraging local authorities to facilitate the use of open outdoor spaces that pubs and restaurants can use for additional space. I expect to have this further scientific advice in 2 weeks, and I will set out then, hopefully on or around the 2nd of July, whether outdoor hospitality can reopen during Phase 2, which I hope will be the case, or if further mitigations are required ahead of Phase 3. I understand the desire of all businesses to reopen quickly. However, it is vital that when services and venues do reopen, they do so safely and in a way that is consistent with continued suppression of the virus. That is how we best avoid a resurgence of it that could lead to businesses having to close down all over again. On a related issue, although this also affects many areas including education and public transport, I have also commissioned further advice from the advisory group on physical distancing requirements. Let me be clear that the advice and evidence we have at this time supports physical distancing at 2 metres. And we know that while there are no absolutes, and we should not see this in isolation, the shorter the distance, the greater the risk of transmission. So I will not change this guidance without rigorous consideration and appropriate assurance. However, I have asked our advisers to consider whether there are particular settings and circumstances in which, with additional mitigations if necessary, it might be possible in future to recommend a distance of 1 or 1.5 metres. I hope to also have this advice within 2 weeks, and I will report on it then. But let me reiterate that at this stage, the advice is unchanged. You should continue to maintain 2 metres distance from people in households other than your own. Finally, I want to make some broader points about priorities for the future. In the context of beating this virus and saving lives, there is no higher priority for me and this government than getting children back to full-time education. But it must be done safely. So as I set out yesterday, we will be working to ensure that contingency plans for blended learning, if and for as long as that is necessary, maximise the time children spend in school. But we will also be working to create the conditions and put in place the protections that can get children back to school on both a full-time and a normal basis as soon as possible. Indeed, part of the reason I am taking a cautious approach to easing lockdown now is to help us do precisely that by suppressing this virus as much as we can. We will work with councils to keep parents and young people fully updated in the period ahead. We also understand the increasing pressures that parents face in juggling childcare and work. So in the meantime, we will continue to increase access to critical childcare for those who need it most, and we will work with employers to encourage maximum flexibility in working arrangements. And while it is not the principal motivation for them, extended household groups now, and as we hopefully expand them in future, may also help with informal childcare. Another key issue, of course, is public transport. We want people to work from home whenever they can. That is likely to be the advice for the foreseeable future, and to cycle or walk wherever possible. But as we open up more workplaces and public services, more people will use public transport. We have for several weeks now recommended that people should wear face coverings in enclosed spaces where physical distancing might not always be possible, such as on public transport and in shops. That is because of the evidence that wearing face coverings can reduce the risk of the virus being transmitted. If you have COVID, but maybe don't realise it because you don't have symptoms, a face covering reduces the risk of you passing it on to other people. and other people wearing face coverings helps to protect you in a similar way. Of course, it's not an absolute safeguard, and physical distancing, hand washing and good hygiene will always be more important in preventing transmission. But face coverings can help to reduce the risk of transmission, and that is important. For that reason, we have decided that from Monday, face coverings will be mandatory on all public transport. That includes taxis and private hire cabs, as well as buses, trains, the Glasgow subway, Edinburgh trams, planes and enclosed areas on ferries. This will be subject to some exemptions, for example, for children under the age of 5, people with breathing difficulties and those who have physical conditions which make it hard to keep the mask in place. It will also not apply to drivers who are already protected by a shield of some kind. We believe that this measure will be increasingly important as use of public transport increases, and that implementing it now will help to reduce the risks of transmission and build public confidence. We are consulting further over the next few days on whether face coverings should also be mandatory in shops, and I will report back on this before non-essential retail opens on the 29th of June. However, I would appeal to the public, please do not wait for this. Please follow the strong advice now to wear face coverings in shops. Presiding Officer, the measures we have set out today are proportionate and cautious, but they are also significant. They restart more of the economy, they reopen more public services, and they allow us to see more of our family and friends. They also lay the groundwork for further changes to come. Crucially, we consider that if everyone abides by the rules and if everyone follows the guidance, and I cannot stress enough how vital that is, but if everybody does that, then these changes are, in our view, consistent with the continued suppression of the virus that is so critical to a sustainable recovery. Of course, the changes also mean that the overall message we will be communicating to the public must evolve too. The willingness of all of us to stay at home has been fundamental to our progress so far, and I still encourage people to stay at home as much as possible. However, as we're now permitted to go out more, our overarching message must adapt. So in this next phase, instead of asking you to stay home, protect the NHS and save lives, we will be asking you to stay safe, protect others and save lives. This advice recognises that although the virus is being suppressed, it has not gone away. It is still highly infectious, it is still deadly to some, and it is dangerous to many. So we must continue to suppress it. Indeed, we must do everything we can to eliminate it as far as possible. And we all, each and every single one of us, have a part to play in that. By sticking to the rules in each phase, all of us can help to do so. We will keep ourselves safe, we will protect each other, which will also help protect the National Health Service, and we will save lives. And we will ensure that all of us together can move more quickly and more safely to the next phase. So please continue to stay 2 metres away from people in other households, with the exception of those who can form extended household groups. Only meet with other households outdoors. Wear face coverings in enclosed spaces, wash your hands frequently and thoroughly, and if you have symptoms of COVID, get a test and self-isolate immediately. And let me remind everyone, you can book a test at nhsinform.scot or by phoning NHS 24 on 0800 028 2816. And if you experience any of the symptoms, which of course is a new cough, a fever, or a loss of or change in your sense of taste or smell, please don't wait to see if you feel better the next day. Book a test immediately and follow the advice on isolation. And Presiding Officer, let's all remember in the weeks ahead, and this is perhaps now more the case than ever, the decisions all of us take as individuals will affect the well-being of all of us. So if we all act in that spirit of solidarity and love for each other, as we have been doing, we will get and we will keep this virus under control, and we will get our lives back to something that feels much more normal. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. The First Minister will now take questions. Jackson Carlo.
Presiding Officer, I thank the First Minister for early sight of her statement. Presiding Officer, it's no exaggeration to say lives and livelihoods are on the line over the coming months. We are facing potentially the biggest economic downturn of our lives. We need government to respond in kind, with urgency and ambition, and I simply do not think this government is showing that ambition. Firstly, let's examine the dilemma facing working parents. Andrew McRae of the Federation of Small Businesses put the problem well this morning. If businesses are to return, if the economy is to return, then they need to have staff in place. He continued, that is why we are worried by the suggestion that some children will only return to school a couple of days a week, well into the autumn, making life incredibly difficult for working parents. His words, and he's right. How is a single working mother with 2 children at home 3 days a week supposed to get back to work? What measures are going to be in place for her? Doesn't she deserve more than what the First Minister called a contingency plan from the First Minister?
First Minister.
I think it's regrettable that Jackson Carlaw is incapable of rising to the challenge of a national crisis. I've recognised all along how difficult this is for individuals and businesses across the country, but my first responsibility is to protect the health of people across the country and to do everything I can to save lives from a deadly virus. It's not that long ago that Jackson Carlaw stood up in this Parliament and made the claim that this government hadn't and wasn't doing enough to protect health and save lives. Now he seems to think we should throw caution to the wind, forget that this virus is a threat and simply take action that would not be responsible. Presiding Officer, I will act responsibly, I will act carefully and I will act cautiously. On the issues of young people in schools, let me remind the Chamber that August the 11th, when all children in Scotland will be able to return to school, is actually several weeks earlier than that will happen in England, when children will not return to school until September on a blended basis. But our job is to make sure, firstly, that children can return to school safely. Let me quote the WHO Director of Europe just this morning, when he said that a warning shot has been fired. Schools reopening in a few countries have resulted in local flares in numbers of cases. We need to remain diligent and lift restrictions with care. That is what I am going to do. So we will continue to take action to suppress this virus. We will work to ensure that any contingency that is necessary for school education maximises the amount of time young people are in school, but we will also work to create the conditions which involve suppressing the virus to get children safely back to school full-time and on a normal basis. And in the meantime, we will do everything we can, including some of the changes I have announced today, to support parents with the childcare challenges that they face.
Jackson Carlaw.
Oh, Presiding Officer, I note the limited relaxations the First Minister announced. Indeed, I welcomed every one of them a fortnight ago when they were announced elsewhere, to much derision from her. We need much more ambition from this government. Children need it so they can get back to school and continue their education. Working parents also need it so they have a chance of staying in work. And on the economic recovery, I'm afraid this government is simply not listening. We read that leading companies across Scotland are unable to get a call with either ministers or civil servants. We hear from senior business figures, some close to the SNP, who simply don't think this First Minister gets it, nor that there is a plan. Today, the head of the Scotch Whisky Association, Karen Betts, has urged the government to make an open call for all hands on deck. She wants this government to reach outside the First Minister's inner circle so fresh ideas can be brought in. Will the First Minister do so, and will she do it now?
First Minister.
Well, I won't do it right now because I'm standing up in the Scottish Parliament chamber answering questions. But, for example, this afternoon I'll be speaking to all of the key business organisations. I'll be speaking to the Scottish Retail Consortium. I'll continue to speak to interest organisations right across this country. But I will never take my eye off my fundamental responsibility, which is to keep this country safe and to avoid lives being lost. Jackson Carlaw said that he would have welcomed the lifting of these restrictions that I've announced today 2 weeks ago. That would have been utterly reckless and it would have put lives at risk. And that's why I think increasing numbers of people across Scotland are glad that Jackson Carlaw is not standing in this position. We have to act carefully and we have to put the health of the country absolutely at the centre of everything we do, because if we ease restrictions too quickly, then this virus will run out of control again and we will be right back to square one, imposing a lockdown and requiring businesses to close. That would be wrong and it would be irresponsible. And you know what, Presiding Officer? If we did that, the first person that would be standing up in this chamber saying we'd gone too quickly and not discharged our responsibility would be Jackson Carlaw, because he blows with the wind, or rather, he blows in whatever direction his colleagues in Westminster tell him to.
Jackson Carlaw.
Well, I'm glad to hear that the First Minister is finally engaging. I hope she's just not talking to all these organisations, but finally listening to them as well. On the one hand, and she needs to, because she needs all the help she can get. On the one hand, the First Minister's top economic adviser is claiming that the UK is going to be the worst performing developed economy in the world, and that Scotland will be even worse than that. On the other hand, the Finance Secretary Kate Forbes, the Minister who is supposed to be leading our response to this generational crisis, finds time to go on Twitter to attack the media for reporting his comments and insists it's all fine. Can someone tell Scotland's Finance Minister that Trumpian tweets don't make jobs? That getting the Twitter mob to blame the media don't make jobs? Isn't it the case that this SNP government simply doesn't understand or comprehend the depth of the economic crisis we're about to go through?
I have comprehended the depths of the health crisis, the economic crisis, the education crisis since day one. I, with my ministerial colleagues, have quite literally been working round the clock to steer Scotland through this crisis. And we will do that for as long as it takes. And we will continue to try to steer a steady, consistent and safe path for the country through this. I have despite the tone and tenor of changes today, prompted by the tone of Jackson Carlaw's questions, I will continue to try to do that non-party politically as far as I can. But I do, presiding officer, I do really regret the constant tendency of Jackson Carlaw to try to politicise all of these issues. And scrutiny is really important, but if anybody doubts that, just reflect on the fact that most of the things that Jackson Carlaw criticises the Scottish Government for, he supports when the UK Government are doing them. And there are many, many examples of that, from schools through to the economy, but perhaps the most egregious example of that inconsistency, if I can put it that mildly, presiding officer, is this. Jackson Carlaw, of course, who led the pack baying for the head of Cath Calderwood, lost his tongue over Dominic Cummings. That is the party political engagement and the inconsistency and the hypocrisy that has no place when you are dealing with a national crisis. This is tough. It is hard for individuals and businesses. It's tough and hard for governments all across the world. But my job is to focus on getting the country through that. And regardless of Jackson Carlaw's attempt to distract attention from that, which I suspect is more about distracting attention from the travails of a government somewhere else, I'm going to focus on that job at hand and get Scotland safely through this biggest crisis any of us have ever faced.
Jackson Carlaw.
Presiding officer, we all welcome plans to get the country out of lockdown, but Scotland doesn't just need a plan to open back up. It needs a route map back to recovery. It needs imagination, ambition and an open mind. But as one high-profile business figure was quoted last week, I'm not sure the SNP understand the scale of it all. What's the plan? There's deafening silence. Children need a plan so they can get back to school. Parents need a plan so they can get back to work. Scotland needs a plan so we can avoid a depression as great as any of us have ever seen. And I hope the First Minister will deliver it. But a front-bench team that deals in angry tweets rather than common-sense solutions doesn't augur well. First Minister, isn't it time for Scotland to get back to work and for ministers to engage with everyone else to achieve it?
First Minister.
I think Jackson Carlaw should maybe deal with the Twitter trolls on his own benches before he starts to give anybody else lessons. Look, presiding officer, this is serious stuff, and where Jackson Carlaw is right, actually, and let me try to introduce a note of consensus, is Scotland does need plans for all of these things, and Scotland has and will continue to see those plans implemented. So what I'm going to do, I have to say, Presiding Officer, is leave Jackson Carlaw if he wants to, and I regret it, and I would welcome back into a constructive approach so that we can collectively get through this. But if Jackson Carlaw wants to continue just to snipe from the sidelines, then I will leave him to do that, because I've got hard work to do, and I am going to go on with a hard graft of getting this country through coronavirus, doing that safely and building the sustainable recovery that we all want. So I'll focus on that job, and I'll leave Jackson Carlaw to indulge in whatever makes him happy.
Richard Leonard.
Can I thank the First Minister as well for advance sight of her statement. Presiding Officer, 4 weeks ago, when the government launched its route map out of lockdown, I said that the Labour Party stood behind the First Minister and the government. This is a national fight to eradicate a deadly virus, and that remains the case today. That does not, of course, mean that we won't hold the government to account, especially where there are yawning gaps between what is announced at daily press briefings and what is happening out there in the real world. 4 weeks ago, I asked the First Minister for 3 guarantees for easing restrictions. Firstly, sharing the evidence behind decisions to relax the lockdown. Secondly, maximising testing with a fully working test, trace and isolate system. And thirdly, that the strategy be agile enough to adapt quickly to changing circumstances. First Minister, the people we represent are not yet convinced that these guarantees are being met. And for the public to have confidence in easing restrictions, the evidence and the testing strategy must be robust and shared widely. And the truth is, we are still woefully behind in using the testing capacity available. As recently as last week, almost 74,000 tests went unused. 4 weeks ago, you announced that Phase 2 would include expanding visits from families to their loved ones in care homes. That was welcome and long awaited. And it's confirmed in today's document accompanying the statement. But with 85% of Scotland's care home staff still not being tested by last week, 1 month to the day after the Health Secretary said all staff would be tested regularly and repeatedly, what are you doing to ensure that this much-needed extension to visiting will be safe? Can you confirm that it will happen? And can you confirm when it will happen?
First Minister.
First of all, address Richard Leonard's 3 points. Firstly, evidence being published. We publish when we take the decision to go from one phase into another. The analysis of the evidence that is based on that will be published, I think, early tomorrow, which will be available for people to read and to scrutinise and to ask questions on. Secondly, Test and Protect is up and running, and Test and Protect is working. The biggest challenge for us now is to make sure that every single member of the public out there know about Test and Protect, that they know what to do when they have symptoms, and they know where to go to book a test, and they know what to do around self-isolation. And when people are contacted to say that they have been in contact with somebody who's positive, they know where to go for support in order to self-isolate themselves. And there is already a campaign behind that. There will be information goes to every single house in the country over the next week or so, telling them exactly what to do. And every member of this chamber, I would argue, has a responsibility to help with that task. The testing capacity is there, the contact tracing capacity is there, and the support for those who require to isolate is there. So this is part of the big challenge we face in the weeks ahead. In terms of testing, we are expanding routine testing. Richard Leonard is just wrong in the figures he gives about the testing of care home staff. The latest figure is 22,500 have been tested through NHS labs. There will be additional number tested through the drive-through centres. That is a significant proportion of care staff, and we will be doing that testing on a regular basis. There will be further consideration given to other groups. Testing will have a role to play in future in terms of getting parts of society back to normal. And lastly, on the issue about visits to care homes, what the route map update that we're publishing today says is that we will give further consideration to that, and we will then set out when visiting on a normal basis can resume, although it is likely that will start with visiting outdoors. But our clinical advice says that we must take great care in that. The numbers of cases of coronavirus in care homes is reducing. The number of deaths, thankfully, is reducing. The number of care homes with outbreaks is reducing. But given the experience we've had in care homes, we want to tread very cautiously. But for people watching, I would remind them that there are already arrangements in place for visiting in end-of-life situations, and as I talked about yesterday in the Chamber, for other exceptional circumstances. So we will continue to take great care as we navigate through all of these things. And in all of this, I believe, I think I said the first time I stood in this chamber and addressed this, proper, robust scrutiny is really important for government as well as for everybody else. But what I will not be swayed by in any aspect of this is the normal political toing and froing. I have the biggest responsibility I've ever faced in facing this right now, and I'm determined to do the right things in the best way and at the right pace to get this country through this crisis.
Richard Leonard.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And look, I understand the First Minister's caution, but it needs to be underpinned by the resources going into not just testing capacity, but testing being carried out, especially in those settings like residential care homes. Let me turn to something else. Just this week, we learned more about the impact of COVID-19 on the Scottish economy. Manufacturing down 25%, retail and wholesale down 35%, construction down 40%. We know that businesses need a steady supply of work, and we know that unless something changes soon, blue-chip companies like Rolls-Royce and Alexander Dennis are facing a significant cut in capacity. We need action, and we need it urgently. Yesterday, in response to Neil Bibby, the First Minister said that instead of, I quote, lots of different task forces, there should be, and I quote, more joined-up strategic task forces. Let me say to the First Minister, what we need is not a reactive approach based on short-life task forces. We need a proactive, comprehensive, forward-looking, planned, long-term approach for the whole Scottish economy, which is why 4 weeks ago I asked the First Minister to work with us, to work with trade unions, to work with employers, to establish a new industrial strategy, a new plan for the economy and a new plan for jobs. Will the First Minister today finally commit to that, to save businesses, to save jobs and to build the Scottish economy back better?
First Minister.
I think I committed to it the first time he asked me about it, and indeed the Scottish Government is working already on the recovery in a whole range of ways. In an economic sense, we will have on Monday next week the recommendations from the group that Benny Higgins has been chairing for us, and that will also feed into the work that we're doing. And I welcome constructive inputs from people, members, parties, interests across this chamber. I would say on Richard Leonard's point about task forces, my comments yesterday about task forces were in response to another request from one of his members to set up a task force. So I think, perhaps criticising me for what I said there when it was responding to that request is perhaps just a little bit unfair. So if you take, I'm not going to go into detail about particular discussions or support for individual companies, but you take a company like Rolls-Royce, a big challenge for us to try to work with Rolls-Royce to get to a repurposing of what they do. But Rolls-Royce is part of the challenge they are facing right now is part of a global challenge. Alexander Dennis, companies like that in the bus industry, we have an opportunity now in terms of aligning our recovery from this crisis with our climate change ambitions. So for companies like that, potentially massive opportunities. So these are things that are already underway in the Scottish Government, and I welcome ideas, suggestions, whenever they come from people across the chamber.
Richard Leonard.
Thanks, Presiding Officer. Let me turn finally to the subject which has preoccupied lots of people this week. Parents across Scotland have shared their anger over the last few days over a lack of leadership in setting out a plan for getting pupils back to school full-time. This should be the goal of all of us. And just yesterday, the First Minister described the blended learning models that councils are working towards as a contingency plan. But it must be the ambition to go beyond this contingency plan to return children to school for their whole class time in a safe way. First Minister, to respond to the calls from this Parliament, but more importantly, the legitimate concerns of parents, pupils and of school staff, including teachers, that will require the agility that I called for 4 weeks ago. So let me ask again today what I asked you yesterday. Will you produce a route map with a clear timetable on, which will explain how you will get pupils back into classrooms 5 days a week and how you will provide the resources needed to make sure that this can happen as quickly and as safely as possible?
First Minister.
Yes, but I hate to kind of point out the basics to Richard Leonard. You have to do the work in order to produce that. That is what is happening right now. We produced on the day we published the route map the report of the Education Recovery Group, which, remember, was a plan agreed not just with government but with local government, teacher unions, parent organisations as well. That plan that was published then is being operationalised by the work councils are doing. We are applying scrutiny to that, and as I said yesterday, we are also working on what are the conditions and what are the protections required to get children back, not just on a full-time basis, but into schools as normal, so that they're not just getting full-time education, but they're able to interact with each other as young people want to do. Now, that requires continued suppression of the virus. And therefore, we have to take the actions that we're taking right now. We have to go with the considered plan so that we drive the levels of the virus down, and then we can consider different ways of getting schools back. Unfortunately, there are no magic wands when it comes to this virus. There is just a lot of really hard work and really detailed work to get us to where we all want to be. And that is what the government is doing. And I'd say this to Richard Leonard, and it's possibly more accurately directed at the other side of the chamber, but if we act in a way that is reckless when it comes to getting kids back to school, if we do not, Richard Leonard is saying we want to know what the plan is, you require, we need to have contingency in case the virus runs out of control again, and we need to have a plan for if we get the virus suppressed. That's what we are dealing with. So we'll continue to do that hard work. But the point I'm going to make is this. If we in, say, October or November end up with an outbreak of this virus in schools, Jackson Carlaw, Richard Leonard will be the first to be standing up here, as they have been with care homes, and asking why we didn't take greater care. I will not compromise the safety of children. We will act in a way that keeps them safe and gets them back to school as quickly as possible.
Alison Johnson.
Thank you. The Scottish Greens stand in solidarity with asylum seekers. We will support them in their efforts to make a better life for themselves, and we utterly condemn the racist thugs whose behaviour in Glasgow's George Square in recent days has appalled people across Scotland. As the First Minister knows, around a third of households don't have access to a car. And in Glasgow, that figure is more than 50%. The First Minister will understand the relief of some of the lowest paid workers that public transport services are being increased as we enter phase 2, although many will be concerned about the practicalities. Because without adequate transport provision, many people face the real possibility of being unable to get to work, of losing their jobs. So how will the First Minister ensure that those who most need access to public transport get it?
Can I firstly associate myself with Alison Johnson's opening remarks? The scenes in Glasgow last night were horrifying and disgraceful, and we should be pretty blunt about the cause of that. It was not people protecting statues or the cenotaph. It was a bunch of racist thugs seeking to pour out their prejudice, vile prejudice against asylum seekers and refugees. It is not what Scotland is about. Welcoming refugees and asylum seekers is part of who we are, and we should stand against the scenes that we saw in Glasgow last night, and those who broke the law, in my view, should face the full force of it. In terms of public transport, these questions are important. Transport Scotland is working with transport operators to make sure that they maximise the capacity that they have, but in a way that is safe, with physical distancing and hygiene in place. And part of this is about making sure That employers do help with staggered working start times, for example, but that we are also encouraging and investing, and Michael Matheson has already made announcements in this regard in recent weeks, into active travel as well, so that we are enabling more people to walk and to cycle to work rather than rely on cars or public transport. And I do think in terms of public confidence, the wearing of face coverings will help to build that confidence that using public transport is something that is safe to do, notwithstanding the continued risks that the virus poses to all of us.
Alison Johnson.
Thank you. I welcome the First Minister's statement regarding face coverings and their place in protecting our key transport workers on our buses, our trains and our ferries. And the First Minister is quite right. This will encourage confidence on those who rely on these vital services. But of course, public transport will inevitably be running at a greatly reduced capacity. So it is critical that businesses continue to follow Scottish Government advice to work from home wherever that is possible. Now, the First Minister has suggested staggered start times. It's important that we all avoid rush hour, but this will become increasingly challenging in the weeks and months ahead as businesses begin to open. So what steps will the Scottish Government and Transport Scotland take to ensure that businesses comply with this wherever possible?
First Minister.
There is active engagement across all sectors to make sure that there is, we're publishing guidance for all sectors about safe opening. The responsibilities on employers to make sure that they do what they can to be flexible with workers. One of the things that we want to encourage all employers, and I should have mentioned this earlier on, is to make sure they play their part in making sure that the public know about test and protect and what to do if they have symptoms. So again, none of this is straightforward. Anybody in any part of the chamber who stands up and says any of this is straightforward is doing a disservice to the public, individuals and businesses right across the country. This is difficult, it will continue to be challenging, and we have to work through these issues just as we have been doing for the past 3 months, and all of us have a part to play. Government has a part to play in making sure the guidance is in place, and where necessary the support, including financial support, is in place. Employers have a responsibility to make sure they are supporting their workers. Individuals can help by walking and cycling where possible, and working from home where that is possible as well. And just as collective action and endeavour has got us to where we are right now in tackling this virus, it will continue to be important as we work through the significant challenges that still lie ahead.
Willie Rennie.
I want to thank the First Minister for her statement and the advance notice of it, and reiterate my intention to continue to provide constructive support to make this work. The First Minister has announced the return to work for thousands of parents, but without explaining adequately who will look after their children. There is no school yet. Childminders are still limited and can be costly. Critical childcare is strictly limited too, and grandparents and friends are still largely off limits. I've asked this twice already this week, but it is still not clear. How will parents who are required to work get the childcare that they need?
First Minister.
Look, this is it's an important question, but I'm going to be really frank. There is no single, straightforward answer to any of these questions right now. And that's hard for me to say, and it is hard for people to hear. I recognise that, but you look at any other part of the UK right now, and there are no straightforward answers to these questions. We are still dealing with an unprecedented challenge. So we have to try to balance things as far as we can. So we are still saying to employers that they should be encouraging home working and supporting home working where possible. They should be flexible where there are childcare issues. We are increasing, and we will continue to try to increase as far as possible access to critical childcare beyond what has been available so far. The steps we've announced today, well, it's not the principal motivation around extended households. I would hope we could expand that concept in the next couple of weeks perhaps, that makes more informal childcare possible. So none of this is straightforward. There is no magic solution to dealing with a situation in which, to save lives, we have had to close down big parts of our economy and society. And as we open them up again, we're having to do it carefully in a gradual way. And I recognise how difficult that is for people. But if I try to pretend there are easy solutions, or if I try to go too quickly in order to try to create solutions before it is safe to do so, then I risk taking the whole country backwards with the virus running out of control. And I've already quoted it, so I won't quote it again, but the comments from the WHO this morning are very sobering indeed. The quote actually ended with him saying he wanted to repeat himself, that the risk remains high across all member states. So unfortunately, that means continued caution, and for many people, I recognise that means continued inconvenience and disruption that we will do everything we can to mitigate in the weeks ahead.
Willie Rennie.
The First Minister knows I support this approach, but the problem is the First Minister is asking them to return to work. Their employers are expecting them back, and they can't afford to stay off work because the furlough is ending. The changes today on childcare are minor, and the government does not plan to lift restrictions on childminder capacity until phase 3, which is at least 3 weeks away. Now, I do support caution, and I also support a joined-up approach, but I am afraid the route map and the guidance is not joined up. They are flawed. So how is the First Minister going to fix this?
First Minister.
Well, I don't know whether Willie Rennie is saying we shouldn't open up carefully parts of our economy, or whether he's saying we should put children into unsafe environments, but we are seeking to join it up. So we are taking a phased approach through phase 2. So we are not asking people to go back to work until a later part of the phase, when we hope we will be able to, for example, extend the extended household concept, and we will then be getting into the period where we're making decisions for phase 3, which will open, I hope, other possibilities around childminders and other early years settings. So yes, I accept there is no perfect alignment with any of these things right now, but that comes from the uniqueness of the situation and the severity of the situation we're dealing with. What we are trying to do is to get these steps in as much alignment as possible, and we will continue to try to do that. And I would say again that the more we continue to suppress the virus now, the more we open the possibility of being able to go more quickly in future. So none of this, as I keep saying, is easy or straightforward for anybody out there across the country. And if people want to put forward alternative suggestions, I will always listen to those. But we are taking a considered, careful and planned way forward, where different individuals, different interests, different businesses and organisations, with the support of government, all have to play our part in getting us through this. It is not easy, but there is really no alternative to taking this careful route that we're taking right now.
Thank you very much. But big interest, as you can imagine, from members across the chamber. I'd encourage everybody to keep it succinct to the point. Claire Adamson, to be followed by Miles Briggs.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I thank the First Minister for her question and share with us her the interest in the economy being boosted, but as safely and as carefully as possible. Many businesses have stalled in their ambitions to develop business premises and are keen to move on. However, what will phase 2 mean for the operation of organisations such as the valuation joint boards, where the process of getting up and running is being stalled due to the constrictions of COVID?
First Minister.
Well, in terms of, we've said non-essential offices right now should remain closed, but other indoor workplaces can start to reopen. For lots of organisations, they have been doing a lot of work online and virtually, and with supporting people working at home. And it's important that we continue to support that way of working. But increasingly and progressively over these next few weeks, we want to see more businesses able to return to something that is closer to normal, because particularly in the areas of public services or quasi-public services, that is also essential for getting other things moving. Getting registration offices open, even for essential business, is important to allow limited weddings and civil partnerships to take place. So this is a very complicated puzzle for all of us, and we have to try and get all of those bits working together as best we can. But I would just remind people that every single government, certainly across the UK and across the world, is grappling with these same issues right now. We look to learn to see whether other countries are doing things differently, but there is no straightforward, simple way through this. We are dealing with a deadly virus for which there is still no cure and not very many treatments, although we had some positive news on that front this week. So that's the situation we face, and anybody for whatever purpose or for whatever motivation is trying to pretend to people that there are simple solutions here that we're just not bothering to find is really doing a disservice to the severity of the crisis that we're facing. And I know that's not what Claire Adamson is doing, but some of the other comments in the Chamber today seem to sound a bit like that.
Miles Briggs, be followed by Ian Gray.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. First Minister, more than half of dental practices in Scotland surveyed fear they will not survive the coronavirus crisis. Dentists feel there has been a total lack of transparency and information provided to them by the Scottish Government. So can I ask the First Minister, what support will Ministers provide this vital part of our health services, given today's statement lacks any detail for the full restoration of dental services in Scotland? Because if we don't see action from the Scottish Government, all of us fear that this public health emergency will turn into a long-term public health crisis.
First Minister.
I don't think that is a fair characterisation. The Chief Dental Officer has been working very closely with the dental profession, and actually the plan that the Chief Dental Officer put together was subsequently shared by the WHO amongst many different countries because it was seen as a very high quality piece of work. Dentists, for obvious reasons, have been considered to be high risk of transmission in the last few weeks, but we are now able to move forward thanks in large part to the work the Chief Dental Officer and the profession have been doing, reopening on Monday initially for urgent care, but hopefully quickly after that to get back to normal. And I know there will be many people perhaps not relishing a visit to the dentist, but will have plans to catch up on treatment that they missed. So the dentists will work hard to do that, and they will have the support, as they always do, from the Scottish Government to the extent that they need it in the weeks ahead.
Ian Gray, to be followed by John McAlpine.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Phase 2 allows university lab research to resume, but universities are also setting budgets right now for teaching and learning next academic year, in which they face a shortfall of at least £500 million. They have still had no indication of how the Scottish Government will support them through that. So when will the Scottish Government respond to the crisis in the university sector, critical to our economic recovery?
First Minister.
Well, I'm sorry, that's just plainly and factually wrong. Not only have we worked with universities and will continue to work, we've already given universities an additional £75 million around research. So we will work with the universities as we will work with every sector that has been affected by this crisis, and we will do that methodically, we will do that step by step. But the biggest thing we can do for any sector, for any interest, for any business right now is create the conditions in terms of the suppression of the virus that allows them to get back to normal as quickly as possible. So we will continue to work across all of these things to make sure that whether it's universities, businesses have the support that they need from the Scottish Government, as they have been getting throughout the crisis so far.
John McAlpine, to be followed by Jamie Green.
Thank you. Can the First Minister confirm that all changes apply across the whole country, including islands and remote rural areas? And will she confirm that with the continued 5-mile limit for leisure, people should still avoid making day trips to islands just for recreation?
First Minister.
The changes that I have announced today apply throughout the country and in every part of the country, and part of what will be done as part and parcel of scaling up public transport will be to look at the capacity on ferries to allow people who require to get off islands to visit family in the way that all of us are now enabled can do that, or people who need to get onto an island to visit family can do that as well. So it's important that people on islands get to take advantage of the freedoms that we're all able to enjoy now. But I would say that the restriction that we're asking people to abide by in terms of travel for recreation and leisure is important, and that also applies across the country. So we would ask people not to go more than 5 miles for leisure, not to flock to beauty spots or tourist attractions, because these kinds of things still pose a risk and they put pressure on parts of our infrastructure that are avoidable at the moment. But we very much hope to lift that restriction when we go into the next phase, not least because we look forward to seeing our tourist industry resume from the 15th of July.
Amy Green to be followed by Jackie Bailey.
Thank you. The First Minister said yesterday that she would move heaven and earth to get schools reopened. I agree. And I also agree that the health of our children and their families is important too, but this should not be a choice between losing your health or losing your education. So let me ask, if the government's own advisory group reports back to government that the current social distancing guidelines can be reduced, councils will have to rewrite their current plans, and that will come at a cost. So, First Minister, how much will local authorities be given to support them deliver this most fundamental of children's rights, the rights to an education?
First Minister.
Well, firstly, I agree it's not a choice between education and health, but you can't have one without the other. So you have to make sure that we prioritise both, and that's exactly what we will do. And in terms of it's interesting the Tories, just write a blank cheque, which is never the approach they take in government to anything, not even until they're absolutely forced to free school meals for children. We work with councils, and we will work with councils to assess their plans, what they require to do, and if those plans change, as plans almost in every sector might change as the experience of the virus changes and what we need to do to tackle it changes, then we will work to support in the way that we have to. And if that requires resources, we will make those resources available. We will do that in a proper process of dialogue and engagement, because that's the right and responsible way to do things when you're actually responsible for delivering things, not just talking about them.
Jackie Bailey to be followed by Maureen Watt.
The First Minister will be aware that Scotland's GDP fell by 18.9% during April, the largest monthly fall ever in Scotland. Andrew Wilson, author of the SNP's Growth Commission report, warned that Scotland was heading for the worst economic slump in the developed world. First Minister, is Andrew Wilson right? And of course she will be aware that economic poverty kills as much as any virus. So what will she do to save jobs and tackle poverty? And will she now publish a child poverty strategy instead of delaying it indefinitely at this critical time?
First Minister.
Can I just say, as an aside, Andrew Wilson's a great friend of mine and colleague, former colleague, somebody that I have huge respect for. But it does amuse me, actually, and I need any amusement I can get right now, that when Andrew Wilson is arguing for the SNP and the cause the SNP stands for, according to the opposition, he's wrong and usually a corporate lobbyist. But when he's saying things that can be construed as criticisms of the SNP, suddenly we've got to take it all as gospel. So I look forward to perhaps the same respect for Andrew Wilson emerging across the opposition benches when he's arguing the case for Scottish independence. But on the points about GDP and poverty, they are important points. Of course, GDP has fallen. We saw the UK fall of over 20%. We have put the economy effectively into hibernation. The challenge now is to get the economy safely out of hibernation so that we see as quick as possible a recovery in GDP, which will be more possible than it would have been otherwise had there not been that attempt, which, to be fair to them, the UK government led in order to protect the productive capacity of the economy. In terms of child poverty, this government has done more than any other across the UK to tackle child poverty. We will be taking forward our plans for the child income supplement. We have made announcements around the free school meals and food insecurity. And in terms of the child poverty strategy, I agree we have to get that in place as quickly as possible so that we can do the additional things we need. But anybody who doesn't recognise that the world has changed fundamentally in the past 3 months, and therefore we need to take a pause to make sure that our strategy that we do produce takes account of the changes and the much greater challenges we now face, I don't think is perhaps thinking about this as closely as they need to. So that commitment to tackle child poverty, which was strong going into this crisis from the Scottish Government, is even stronger coming out of it.
Maureen Watt to be followed by Donald Cameron.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The hospitality industry will no doubt be disappointed, but I hope understanding about the need to wait a little longer before opening beer gardens. I welcome the First Minister's comments that local authorities have been asked to be flexible about allowing the use of outdoor spaces. But will the Scottish Government also meet with the hospitality industry to discuss what further steps can be taken to support the sector, particularly the extension of furlough and reductions in VAT?
First Minister.
Yes, of course, we will have ongoing and close engagement with the hospitality sector. We are already and will continue to argue for the extension of the furlough scheme, and also for the UK Government to look at how that can perhaps be targeted in the future on particular sectors that are having a longer impact from the crisis. We will also continue to look at the support we can bring to bear for sectors like hospitality and tourism. I understand the hospitality sector will be disappointed at not having a specific date today. As I said earlier on, I hope we can still give that within this phase 2. But some of the most concerning emerging evidence about the virus is what is referred to as super spreading evidence about the risks in some settings, which comes from a range of different things, often associated with how people are breathing, if they're shouting over noise or exercising. We must understand that properly in order to make sure that any mitigations that are required are put in place. That's why we've commissioned that further advice. We will have it within a couple of weeks, and I hope then that opens the way to an opening for the hospitality sector. And I think it's important that local authorities do think about how they can provide additional space, outdoor space that wouldn't normally be used, so that over the remainder of the summer months we can see the hospitality sector start that process of recovery.
Donald Cameron, to be followed by Neil Findlay.
Thank you. On a similar topic, hospitality businesses, be they pubs, cafes, hotels or restaurants, are in despair. They will be bitterly disappointed by this statement and at the lack of detail within it. For this sector, every day matters at this time of year. So can the First Minister give a firm date when the review of the 2-metre rule will be published? And will that review contain a full and rigorous analysis of the science around this issue?
First Minister.
Look, I recognise how difficult it is for the hospitality sector, but I hope the member was not suggesting that we just go ahead regardless of the concerns that have been addressed. And interestingly, there is no firm date for the opening of the hospitality sector anywhere else in the UK either right now, which would suggest that all governments, not just this government, are proceeding here very cautiously. I did give a date for the reporting back on the advice. I said that would be around the 2nd. I hope it will be on the 2nd of July, when I hope then, although I can't preempt what's in that advice, that we will be able to give the go-ahead to outdoor reopening within this phase. But if the advice says that there are further mitigations that have to be put in place to protect people from this virus, then I really hope Donald Cameron is not suggesting that we should somehow ignore that. There is a sense, and I understand it with the general public. I'm less understanding when it comes to other politicians who should understand the risks that we still face. But there is a tendency for people listening to these exchanges right now to think that everybody thinks this virus has gone away. This virus has killed more than 4,000 people across this country. There are 4,000 families grieving people right now as a result of this virus, and to suggest we proceed recklessly, I think is wrong, and I will not do it.
Neil Findlay, to be followed by Kenneth Gibson. Neil Findlay.
First Minister, you said that you are continuing with getting Scotland through this crisis safely. Can I ask you to reflect on that rhetoric? We have one of the worst death rates in the world, making claims that are contradicted by the reality faced by 4,000 families across Scotland who have lost loved ones, in my opinion, is totally inappropriate. Councils will be key to getting us through this, and they need money now. The Lothian councils need 100 million to fill the budget black hole and get education going again. When will they receive that money?
First Minister.
In relation to Neil Findlay's first point, I am the last person that anybody will ever hear in any way downplaying the human cost of this virus. Nobody has suffered more than the families who have lost loved ones. But the experience I've had over the past 3 months of standing up every day, having to report on the numbers of people dying, will be something that literally lives with me forever. So I will never, ever, in any way, shape or form, diminish the impact of that. And it's actually that experience that makes me so determined to do everything I can to reduce the numbers of people who die from here on from this virus. And there are plenty of people, I think Neil Findlay quite legitimately and there's nothing untoward about this, is one of the people who says we should have done more earlier. I don't agree with that, because I think we acted in the way that we believed appropriate at the time. But anybody who believes that should now understand the need to behave in an appropriate, careful and cautious way right now, because I do want and see it as my key responsibility to get this country as safely as I can through this virus, and I will not be swayed from that by party political issues. On the issue of council funding, between councils over the course of this crisis have had around £300 million in new money. They've also had, I think, up to £200 million of flexibility with money for early learning expansion that they had already been allocated, that because of the delay in that caused by coronavirus, they've been able to allocate to other places. So £500 million or thereabouts in additional funding. I don't underestimate the pressure that councils are under. We will continue to work with them to assess what additional resources they need. But to say that councils have not been given additional resources during this crisis would just factually be inaccurate.
Kenneth Gibson, to be followed by Alice Cole-Hamilton.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The famous Seawell Hydro Hotel, opened in 1880, faces unprecedented difficulties due to the pandemic, and yesterday began a redundancy consultation with its 200 employees, with between a quarter and a half potentially losing their jobs. This is due to the fall in tourism and income from functions such as wedding receptions. Redundancy will have a devastating impact on both employees and the local economy. The pivotal Enterprise Resilience Fund and rates relief have helped greatly, but what else can Scottish ministers do now to assist Seamell Hydro during phase 2? And what hope can the First Minister give to the hospitality sector, given the restrictions necessitated by social distancing for the foreseeable future?
First Minister.
Well, as Kenny Gibson knows, I grew up in Ayrshire. The Seamell Hydro is a place I know well, and I know how distressed everybody associated with it will be at this point, and that is a feeling that will be replicated across the entire hospitality sector. There's no doubt that the loss of much of the summer season is putting many businesses at risk. Tourism is an important part of our economy, and we are absolutely committed to supporting a safe and strong recovery for it. We've already provided a support package of £2.3 billion as lifeline funding to businesses throughout this period, and that included specific support for both hospitality and tourism, and we will continue to look at how we provide financial support to the sector. We have also, and this was something called for and welcomed by the sector, provided an indicative opening date of 15th of July, and we will publish sectoral guidance later today, actually, on what businesses should do to prepare to reopen safely, and of course we'll continue to engage with the sector over the coming days and weeks. In relation to Seamell Hydro, any decision to consider job cuts is a dreadful one to take, and I know how difficult that will be, but we will continue to extend as much support as we possibly can to staff there or any other tourist business at this time, but we will fundamentally continue to work to get the sector opened as quickly and as safely as possible.
Alex Cole-Hamilton, to be followed by Stuart McMillan.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I sincerely thank the First Minister for her remarks opening zoos on the 29th of June. Over 5,000 people joined our campaign to ask her to help Edinburgh Zoo reopen, and that will be a much-needed lifeline. Can I ask about shielding? There is good news for people who are shielding in today's announcements. It seems very much like they are moving into phase 1 as we move into phase 2. Can people who are in shielding expect to follow the phases, albeit one removed, in future announcements? And can I also ask her to specify, when she talks about extended family groups, can people who are shielding be part of those extended family groups?
First Minister.
No, I said that in my statement. I appreciate it was possibly difficult to follow all the detail, but absolutely not, and that's a really important point of clarity. On the point about shielding more generally, I wouldn't say that there should be an expectation that it will follow one phase behind, not least because we hope by the end of July to give much more tailored advice to people in the shielding group that is much more specific to the conditions, which will allow them to take a more informed and risk-based approach, which I would hope would bring the shielding group, albeit that they will no doubt continue to have to take additional precautions and be much more conscious of risk, more into line with the general population. But we will continue to ease those restrictions as much as possible. And I think it is really good today that we've been able, on the advice of our clinical group, to go further than we thought we would be able to go last week. On zoos, I will be delighted to see Edinburgh Zoo reopen on the 29th of June. We will also, later today, I can confirm, provide some emergency support funding for zoos in Scotland. The aim of the funding will be to prevent animal welfare issues. It will be based on need. 1.6 million is being made available for grants and a further £1 million for loans. So hopefully, as well as the reopening date today, that additional financial support will also be welcomed.
Thank you. Stuart McMillan, to be followed by Graham Simpson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The First Minister said that further discussion will take place on making face masks mandatory in retail outlets. The First Minister will also be aware that trade unions are concerned about staff having to enforce such a policy. Will trade unions actually be part of that discussion?
Yes, they very much will be, as we are seeking to involve trade unions in all of the discussions we are having. I recognise the concern that shop workers have about being in a position where they are having to enforce people wearing face coverings or take action if they're not, and we don't want shop workers to be in that position. So we will have some further consultation to try to work out these issues, and we'll come to a conclusion on this. I think there is a strong case, as there is on public transport, for the mandatory wearing of face coverings, but we need to work through these issues properly. And what I would say to people across the country is, don't wait for a decision on it being mandatory. It is for your protection. For the reasons I set out earlier on, by wearing a face covering, you protect other people, and other people wearing a face covering, they protect you. So please, to people across Scotland, do it now. If you're in a shop, and as you will be required to on public transport from Monday, make sure you cover your face. It's not a medical mask we're asking you to wear, it's a face covering to give that additional protection. But it is the other things, physical distancing, hand washing, cough hygiene, that are the most important things in reducing the risk of transmission.
Graham Simpson, to be followed by Polly McNeill.
Thank you. Can the First Minister tell us what the scientific basis is for her view that outdoor markets are safe to open, but not beer gardens?
First Minister.
I would genuinely refer Graham Simpson to lots of material that is already published, not just the scientific evidence that I would get directly. There is a lot of emerging evidence that particular locations, including pubs, indoors or outdoors, could be a higher risk of transmission. Now, gyms, places where there is congregational or communal singing, fall into the same category. And in short, and I'm not expressing this in the way an expert would do, it's where your pattern of breathing might be changed. So if you're shouting to be heard over music, or if you are singing, then you're more likely to inhale and have the virus transmitted. So that is very strong emerging evidence. It is not necessarily the safe in places like markets where people are wandering around, but even outside with a pub, if there is music playing or if there are lots of people, particularly with alcohol involved, if there is that kind of raising of voices. That, in summary, is what the risk says. I'm not qualified to say what the validity of that is or what the correct mitigations are. But when that risk is there, and when scientists across the world are talking about it, people are used now to hearing about the R number. I would encourage people to go and read up on the K number, which is about super spreading and the kind of situations that I've spoken about. And when there are these risks, it would be reckless and irresponsible of me not to understand them better before taking decisions to reopen pubs.
Polly McNeill, to be followed by Fulton McGregor.
Presiding Officer, the First Minister is aware that the hospitality sector faces catastrophic job losses dependent on the decisions that she takes in the future. And the city that we both represent, Glasgow, is very dependent on the hospitality sector. They locked down when they were asked to, but many in the hospitality sector don't feel that they get the comfort that they need. They are terrified that the furlough scheme, which ends in October, will finish well before there's any recovery plan in place. I've listened carefully, First Minister, to what you've said to others, and I fully understand why you can't give indicative dates. I totally accept that. But you don't seem to have addressed in any specific way what recovery plan or what assistance that you can give the hospitality sector. So I ask you, if you have any thoughts on a recovery plan specifically for the hospitality sector. Many businesses don't get grants because they have rates over 51,000, and I just would like to hear in some detail, if you work with the sector, which you've said that you'll meet with, to talk to them about what specific recovery you can offer.
First Minister.
Well, let me address some specific strands of that. We will produce guidance for the hospitality sector about safe reopening, but we need to understand some of the risks I've just been talking about so that we know that we're advising them to do the right things and all of the things they need to do. That's why we have commissioned the additional work that I've spoken about. But the hospitality sector, like any other sector, needs to have clear guidance about the steps that they will be required to take. Secondly, I think I've heard from Glasgow City Council, for example, some suggestions about how we could provide some support to the sector over the medium term, specifically financial support in terms of trying to reduce some of the burdens that they're under, and we are looking at them closely and will engage with the sector specifically on them. And then thirdly, on the furlough scheme, I very much hope that we will be well on the way to recovery, but this is dependent on suppressing the virus over the next few months. But I have said before, and I will say again, that I think it is essential that there is an extension of the furlough scheme so that there isn't that cliff edge for companies, particularly those in sectors that we know will have a longer lasting impact, and we will continue to make that case very strongly to the Treasury.
And Fulton McGregor.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The First Minister has confirmed that face coverings will be mandatory from Monday on public transport. Can she advise if there are any plans to encourage people to wear them by providing masks at train stations, for example?
First Minister.
We obviously want to encourage everybody to think about how they will equip themselves if they're travelling on public transport from Monday. Passengers are advised to use simple face coverings, scarves or bandanas, for example. This is not about a request or advice for medical face masks. We do, though, expect, understandably, that there will be a small number of passengers who might not have immediate access to face covering or might need some encouragement. So we're working with ScotRail to help travellers across the rail and bus industry in the initial stages to make this change. ScotRail have a supply to give away to passengers in the early days, and this will be distributed at rail stations and major bus stations, but this will be for a limited period of time to give travellers the opportunity to source their own face coverings. And I would stress that these are simple face coverings we are advising. People don't have to go and buy medical masks. In fact, we are expressly saying that that is not required.
Thank you. And I'm afraid that's all we have time for. We have to move on to the next item of business. Apologies to members who I wasn't able to call. We'll just have a short pause before the next item of business. I urge members to be safe as they're leaving the chamber. Observe social distancing rules.